What would be the worst case scenario for the Dallas Cowboys this year, outside of just losing a bunch of games? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also check me out over on the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're going to talk about some worst case scenarios for the Dallas Cowboys in 2025 that don't necessarily have to deal with their win total, because of course, if the Cowboys go like 3-14, that's a bad situation, right? But let's talk about some things that could happen that would be ultimately really bad for this franchise, not only in 2025, but beyond. And let's start with Dak Prescott, Landon.
Yeah, and I don't think this fan base should be too unfamiliar with the idea of the Cowboys winning a bunch of games and then having bad vibes around the team. I mean, that feels like that's been a familiar refrain around this team. And often it's surrounded, the play of Dak Prescott, sometimes in these playoff situations, or at least how the results have turned out. And I think, we talk about, or we think about all the time, obviously, worst case scenario, what's going to end the seasons, and Dak's health is forefront of our mind, just because we have lost him multiple seasons where he's missed either the whole season or long stretches of the season where it's derailed the process. And his health is, as he gets older, isn't going to get to be a better situation. So it's, one of the things that obviously pops in your mind when you think about these lists of what could go wrong. Dak's health has got to be kind of at the top of that list.
Yeah, because there's a scenario where they go 9-8, 10-7, but Dak misses a bunch of time, or he gets hurt at the end of the year. And I think we're at the point where another injury, not a small one, but like another big injury where he's missing multiple months, we would really have to sit back and evaluate, like, okay, are we at this stage of like 2015 Tony Romo, where we're terrified? Yeah, where it's like we're worried about anytime that he gets hit, could that be his last snap in the NFL? Now, I don't think we're quite there yet with Dak.
No.
But you start to look at all the injuries that he's racked up since 2020, and it's pretty alarming. Now, the thing with Dak is he's going into the first year of his new contract. So the Cowboys have him under contract for the next 4 years, and there's a lot of guaranteed money tied up into him. But the fact that if he were to get hurt again, I think we'd have to seriously start considering some off ramps to another potential quarterback.
Yeah, I think that, listen, if the Cowboys don't do something to kind of advance the ball a little bit more on what's next after Dak Prescott during this current contract, then they will have made a mistake that they had made previously with this last contract. They need to start preparing themselves for the post Dak Prescott era, even if that doesn't mean like he retires, even if that just means he takes on a couple more injuries and just isn't the same player, and you're kind of stuck in that situation with the contract. I think you still have to prepare for what is the team going to look like in a post Dak Prescott era, and protect yourself a little bit, because there's a situation where even Dak does stay healthy, and maybe the injuries just pile up on him, or it's finally too much, and he just has a bad season, and you're starting to doubt yourself a little bit. So,
but even in that scenario, though, I think we would be able to convince ourselves, or talk us into like, hey, new coach, new weapons, young offensive line. Like, you could talk yourself into some excuses for Dak. But if he were to get injured again and miss a significant amount of time, at some point the data is just, it's too big to ignore.
Well, the problem is that solving the quarterback is not like a, middle of the season 1 year proposition.
No,
unless you're talking about a first round pick, you need to prepare ahead to kind of plan for what's next in Dak Prescott, start gathering picks so you can get a quarterback. Anyways, the point being that, like, if the worm turns in the situation and there's the seeds of doubt, because honestly, it wasn't the injury with Tony Romo that made where the problem started to arise in my mind. When we went into that season with Tony Romo, and the thought that even one more injury could be the end of his career, and the Cowboys kind of had done only a little bit to prepare for that. If you think about it, they lucked into Dak Prescott.
It was what, Brandon Weed in 2015, right? They had Kellen Moore in 2016. So yeah, they lucked into Dak in the 4th round.
So, I just think that they need to make sure that they're kind of preparing themselves. They have a 31-year-old quarterback who's missed multiple seasons at this point due to injury. And I think Joe Milton is that guy, but they need to make, or at least right now, that's the solution right now, right? But they need to make sure that they're, investing in that. And if they need to kind of pivot to change gears completely because they realize, hey, this contract is going to be an albatross because maybe Dak isn't still the same guy. And I'm not suggesting that that's the case. We're discussing worst case scenarios. Then they need to start preparing for what they do next at that point.
On the flip side, if Dak were to stay healthy, let's say for 16 games, he just misses a random game in there, I think he can start to quiet some of those concerns, right? Because for the most part, the first 4 years of his career, 16, 17, 18, 19, he was really durable. Then he had that fluke ankle injury in 2020. And it just seems like there's been a bunch of problems that have kind of popped up since then, whether it was the Achilles or the calf injury that he had. So 2021, he had the hamstring injury. He had a boot on his foot last year. Remember on 4th of July?
Yeah,
we had a podcast about his mysterious foot injury, right?
Mysterious boot.
Yeah, he had some weird things happen, like the thumb injury that happened in the Tampa Bay game, but he also had a shoulder injury that he was nursing. So again, these are all within like the last 4 years that we're mentioning.
But it's not like a back. It's not like Tony Romo's back injury where it's just like, no one ever got better from a back injury except for Tyron Smith one time. But like no one ever got better from a back injury. And so it's not like that, right? Where it feels like he's dealing with a degenerative situation. It is a bunch of kind of fluky lower body stuff, which makes you wonder, is that connected a little bit? But it's not, like you're feeling like, oh, he's just trying to get through this, lingering knee injury he's had his whole career or something like that. So I do agree that there is certainly a path in which, Dak plays all 17 games this year, 16 games this year, or he plays 15 plus games this year, right? Maybe he misses something, a game or two because of a fluke thing. But yeah, I certainly think that that's what my expectation is. I'm not going in like I was with Tony in that year, truly holding my breath about every hit he took, because even before we knew what that injury was with Tony, like when Tony took that hit and was on the turf, in the Seattle turf, you knew it was over. You knew it was over. It was, it didn't really matter. Like if it was out 5 or 6 weeks or the rest of the season, it was such an indication that it was over for him. And I just don't feel anywhere near that way with Dak Prescott.
No, I agree. I don't think we're there yet, but I think one more injury would start having people really doubt if he's going to be able to stay and make it through a season. So that's, again, knocking on every piece of wood that I have around me that we don't have to have that conversation, but we are talking about the worst case scenario because just like last year, I think they can grind out 7 or 8 wins, even if Dak were to miss time. But that's almost worse. You're almost better off just having a completely down season, go 3-14, get a top 5 pick, and now you have options. But Dak getting hurt for any amount of time would be awful for this franchise. All right, let's talk about some other worst case scenarios that could happen for the. I mean, that's the worst. That
was awful. Let's talk about some less awful scenarios.
Less awful, but pretty bad situations that could play out for the Cowboys. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, so you can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and your spending in one place, so you can stop managing your money and start building your wealth. My family started using Monarch Money 5 or 6 months ago, and listen, I was just realizing how much money we are wasting on food delivery, coffee runs, football cards, you name it. We are probably wasting money on it. But now we are budgeting smarter and we are saving more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing some worst case scenarios for the Dallas Cowboys during the 2025 season. And let's go to the offensive line. On Tuesday's show, we talked about how this offensive line growing together, developing, and getting better as the season went on would be one of the best outcomes. But Landon, what if they struggle? What if Tyler Guyton doesn't take that next step? What if Tyler Booker really struggles as a rookie? What if Terrence Steele can't get healthy? How detrimental could that be to this franchise?
It can be pretty detrimental, and I think a lot of it would be an opportunity cost, right? Like, and I think one of the things that we talked about yesterday was the how much they have invested in the position, and that's why the expectations are high. Those same expectations could breed resentment, right? Like because you have such high expectations, because they invested so much in the offensive line. If it doesn't work out, if you can't get Guyton to kind of turn it on, if Booker just looks like not the same player and isn't able to play at the same rate, if the BB doesn't really take a step inside the center, is just kind of a middling center. You've invested so many first and a third and second round picks that the talent drain on your team overall, if your offensive line isn't able to make up for that, you're not going to be able to make it up for it in other spots on your team with other talent, because it's not going to be there. So I think because the Cowboys have invested so heavily in offensive line, if it doesn't work out, you're going to feel it in the lack of talent overall, and how that plays out in these games. They just won't be able to keep up with these teams. They'll have to be, trying to make up for the lack of talent, while also being having less resources invested in other key areas because they invested them in the offensive line. So it may be subtle at first in the sense that, oh man, the offensive line just isn't what we thought it is, but it will kind of bear itself out long term when you also are missing talent at important positions because you passed on it in order to go get offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys can't afford to have this offensive line even be average, because you're right.
Mm-hmm.
They've invested so many picks and resources into this unit. 3 first-round picks over the last 4 years now, right? Tyler Smith, Tyler Guyton, now Tyler Booker. You invested an early third-round pick in Cooper Beebe, and then you paid Terrence Steele a lot of money on a second contract. So they need this offensive line to be the backbone of their team. And if it's only average or it's below average, I don't think they have the talent at the other positions to kind of make up for it. There are teams across the league that have average to below average offensive lines, but are still really good teams because they have so much talent at like wide receiver or corner or pass rusher. Cowboys just don't have that because they focus their attention on the offensive line. Don't hate it, but they need that unit to play well.
Yeah, and I think the Cowboys have done a better job than some other teams to kind of insulate themselves on, if it doesn't work out. But for sure, it's going to be a major impact in kind of fixing that. And just like the things that they're going to have to do to try to correct it is going to, I think it's obviously mostly going to show up on the offensive side of the ball, where, they have, a nice selection of pass catchers, and they have a plan if the offensive line works. But if it doesn't work, you're really stretching those resources in the skill section specifically really thin, because you're asking, Pickens and CeeDee Lamb to have to get open quite early and separate immediately in order to, give Dak just the windows early, because he's not going to be able to hold on to the ball. And the running backs, they just don't have the kind of talent that can overcome bad blocking on a regular basis. So
I don't think the running backs are going to add value beyond what's blocked for them right now. At least right now, maybe Jaden Blue gets there.
And I think that's the structure they built right now, right? Is that the idea that, hey, early on, as Jaden Blue gets his footing, the offensive line will provide, and as long as you can get what the offensive line is blocking, you should be okay. And then eventually, hopefully, that takes off beyond that. But if it's not that case, and if they're asking guys like Jaden Blue and Williams and Sanders to create on their own without the blocking being there, you're going to have a bad time in that sort of situation.
And by the way, I really do like this strategy of like building up the offensive line. And let's say the offensive line is trending in the right direction. I wouldn't be surprised if next year is the year that they use a high pick or they sign a big name free agent running back to kind of add value on top of that, much like the way Philadelphia did with Saquon Barkley, right? Like, hey, let's get this offensive line fixed. Theirs was already good, but they've had a lot of young players they were cycling in. And now that we're settled, now we're ready to add a Saquon, or what Baltimore did with Derrick Henry. Now we're ready to add that guy that can make a 30-yard run, an 80-yard run, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's ultimately what happens, but they're just not ready for that yet.
Yeah, and I think the strategy is sound, and the hypothetical here is if the strategy fails, right?
Yes.
Like, or at least this round of the strategy. And I agree with you, and I think we probably both would agree that if the offensive line doesn't work as currently constructed, I still think you go this route again and just retry it with a different group of personnel as opposed to trying to go back the other route of building the running game with a running back first, right?
Well,
Like I think you try to rebuild with different offensive linemen probably.
Or trying to build an offense that can work despite having a poor offensive. I think like two teams, and they're both Kyle Shanahan teams. The 49ers, when they had only Trent Williams and just four other dudes, or the Miami Dolphins when they had Teron Armstead at left tackle and then just a bunch of random offensive linemen, including Robert Jones. We've seen offenses like that work before, but man, you're playing offense on hard mode. It's so incredibly difficult to do that.
And those teams also suffer from the same thing that the Cowboys suffer from in the playoffs, right? Is that ultimately at the end of the year, when you really do need the tougher offensive lines to kind of get you through the later season football, the playoff football, you need those offensive lines. So again, I think this is the correct strategy to go. And if it doesn't work out, the Cowboys should just retry it again. But I believe that this is the correct route to go. We'll see if it actually plays out with this iteration.
And I also want to mention really quickly the run defense. If the run defense continues to be a major issue for the third year in a row with three different defensive coordinators, that's a big problem because it probably means that Mozzie Smith did not end up panning out, your first round pick at defensive tackle. Your linebackers continue to be an issue. And maybe someone even like Osa Odighizuwa, who we love and that we were excited that the Cowboys paid in free agency, maybe he's not the answer helping stop the run. And now you got to completely rebuild your defensive line. So they don't need to be dominant stopping the run, but at least be close to average so it's not your Achilles heel all season long.
Yeah, clearly the personnel has been kind of, diverted away from as far as trying to solve the problem that way in the run defense. And that's because of the last two administrations just not really caring about stopping the run that much. So you're hoping that, and it's not like the Cowboys did a ton in the personnel section to kind of change things here so far. We'll see if they still do more. There's still a chance for them to go out and get a veteran defensive tackle. I think that's likely still. But you're right. Like, I think if they continue to fall below the McCool Mosher line, it's going to continue to be an issue that's going to be Achilles heel for them, because I think the things that you feel strong about on this defense, the pass rushers and potentially the pass defenders, like once everybody gets healthy, you're not going to be able to deploy them until you can figure out a way to get those offenses into situations where they have to throw the football. And the Cowboys are going to continue to kind of avoid those situations, the advantageous situations for their defense, if they cannot stop offenses from running the football.
All right, let's talk about one more worst case scenario for the Dallas Cowboys in the 2025 season. We'll tell you what that is next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Landon, last one. We talked about on Tuesday's show how Brian Schottenheimer turning into the guy would be one of the best case scenarios for the Cowboys. On the flip side, if he's in over his head and it's just too much, or he's clearly struggling calling plays and running the team, or if Matt Eberflus his defense just doesn't work in the NFL, you're kind of right back to square one with this offense, wondering, okay, who's running this franchise?
Yeah, for sure. And again, like that's the thing that we don't want to get into a situation with is kind of another situation where there's mismatching timelines and you're in year 2 of a 4-year deal with Dak, where you're starting over with another new head coach, and I have to imagine that the Cowboys at that point would have run out of runway for kind of holdover guys. So now you're really truly likely talking about a new head coach. Like, it's, I don't know about a new system. Maybe they bring in someone to, what I'm saying, but just having to go through all of that, it doesn't really matter. Even as close as they compare it, it still wouldn't be the same. It's still basically starting over in an awkward part of this new contract. It's still kind of a mismatching timeline situation. And again, like, it obviously just, it puts you in a bad spot where you're hiring a coach who's already coming into a situation with a veteran quarterback on a major contract. It probably limits your options there because of that. Even if Dak's like a popular, likable guy, most coaches, especially like new coaches that you may want to hire, may want to be coming into a situation where they're picking their own quarterback. So, it's just, you need Schottenheimer to kind of find his footing in this job, and I don't think it's like, you need him to. I think that's where we do need to have a conversation as a fan base, is like, what are the parameters we're looking for from Brian Schottenheimer to keep and to lose his job, right? Like, is not making the playoffs a fireable offense for Brian Schottenheimer in year one?
No.
So
but I think you'll know when you see it, though, right? Like, I know it's really hard to describe, but like, if this team is just coming out and making the same mental mistakes game after game, and if they're not prepared and they're getting off the really slow starts, and if he's, messing up the late game situations and the clock situations, or again, I'm giving you a lot of examples, he's so far behind on the analytics curve that they're just losing value every week, that's where it becomes a problem. But I would almost say what's worse, Landon, is if he's kind of right in the middle and we leave the year saying we don't know what we think of Brian Schottenheimer, because if he's so bad, you move on from him and you get a new coach. Like, the Texans hired, was it David Culley 1 year before they hired DeMeco Ryans? He was a 1 year head coach, and then they found their guy the next year with DeMeco Ryans. That is a better situation than sticking with a Jason Garrett for 10 years, because you're always right in the middle and you're always hoping you can take that next step, and you never do.
Yeah, I mean, again, you don't need to tell me sell context on me, because I agree. I think it matters. Like, I think is it a situation where they're still having to tinker with the formula of the play calling in game, right? Like, where okay, it seems like he's got it down from a management standpoint. He's got it down as far as like game management, fourth downs and 2-minute offense calling, that sort of thing. He's got that part down, but maybe the chain of command of the play call, or how that's being handled, still needs to be tinkered with, because like we've talked about several different times, it is a big step up for Schottenheimer, not just to the head coach, but to be the head coach play caller, to do both things at the same time. It's a lot. And again, I think there is a lot of benefit for both Dak and for Schottenheimer, in the sense that there's familiarity, and this is basically Dak's offense. Like, I mean, we could talk about the Schottenheimer offense, or talk about like ultimately what he's done in the past. Everywhere Schottenheimer has gone in the past, he's basically kind of, melted into what was already there with the previous. He's kind of been in all these situations where there's been a previous quarterback, right? So, and I think every time that there's a previous quarterback in a situation, you're kind of just doing what that quarterback does well, especially for a quarterback like Dak, right? Who is cerebral, understands what he likes to do, is a veteran quarterback, done a lot of things. So, if it's just a case that like that needs to be tinkered with, or maybe you need, Clayton to take more of a role in the actual calling of the plays in the in game, just to kind of help Schottenheimer deal with more of head coaching flow of things. Like, those aren't fireable offenses to me necessarily, if you feel like that's the case. But if he feels over his head, if he just feels like he's confused with the decisions he's not making, if he doesn't understand how many timeouts he has, if he's losing it all in his head, and seems like it's a case of just it being all too much for him, like, we don't necessarily have time to be giving head coaching school to these guys. But again, I think that's why I like Schottenheimer, right? Is that he's the one of the guy of these, 3 or 4 guys that are new head coaches, who's been an assistant for 30 years, So if anybody has the experience to handle the head coaching part of it, I think it's Schottenheimer just because he's got so much experience doing the other things. It's the added thing of also being the play caller that I worry about for all these guys that are doing both, because it's just a lot to ask. And again, especially for Schottenheimer, who wasn't calling plays for the Cowboys last year.
And I'm willing to give this coaching staff a little bit of grace because they're so young.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all the positional coaches, right? Like their head coach and their defensive coordinator are older, but it's a first-year head coach, but you have, a first-time offensive coordinator. You've got a first-time NFL offensive line coach, a first-time NFL wide receiver coach, and the list goes on, right? If they start out the season a little slow, I get it. But what you want to see is improvement, cutting back on the mental mistakes, cutting back on the game day issues. If they kind of linger as the season goes on, or they don't get better, they don't improve, that's when I'll start getting concerned that maybe this coaching staff is in over their heads.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, it's a lot tougher to kind of gauge this than, year 4 of Mike McCarthy, right? Because there's a serious, easy to see. We've all kind of been able to calibrate our expectations appropriately based on what we feel like we're going to get out of Mike McCarthy Cowboys, right? We don't really know anything to kind of think about with the Schottenheimer situation. We've heard a lot of really positive things. All the players seem really excited, but obviously it's about what happens in these games. So we got to see that first before even just a preseason game to see how he's calling this stuff to get any kind of expectations here.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.